Jai Hind everyone. When World War II terminated, it was only the United States of America which had the nuclear bomb, which it detonated on two cities of Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the other countries, four of them, also caught up with this capability to include Russia, United Kingdom, France, and China. Thereafter, a moment came when nuclear proliferation treaty (NPT) was signed, and after that, caveat was put that unless you follow the NPT and CTBT, the status cannot be formally accepted. So, in formal domain, there are only 5 nuclear powers, but thereafter there are 3 declared nuclear powers, which have these, which includes India as well. And as far as Israel is concerned, the status is ambiguous. There is a fair amount of belief that it has nuclear weapons, varying from 30 to 40 to goes to 80 to 90, but neither it has accepted nor it has ever denied. So it remains in the state of. Now coming to the North Korea, which is besides India and Pakistan, another nuclear country, at least in actual terms. So it had signed the NPT initially, but it was in 2003 when it moved out of the NPT regime, and then thereafter went nuclear. Now, North Korea has got a totally different kind of national setup, where it is a communist country, but very, very autocratic. It's cut off from most of the countries in the world, basically aligned with China, and of late during the Russia-Ukraine war, it came very close to Russia, wherein they have signed a mutual defense treaty that in case of they being attacked by any third country, they will come to the rescue of each other. Of course, after Trump's arrival in the United States of America, seeing his earlier movement to connect with Kim Jong-un, who is the ruler of North Korea, there may be some positive changes, especially when he is trying to normalize his relationship with Russia. But what happens, nobody knows, and how North Korea is going to play up in Southeast Asian nations and Northeast Asian nations. That is something which will concern India in a big way. Actually, the linkages between North Korea and China is so much that there is a belief in certain quarters that China uses North Korea as a test bed to fire and try out missiles and a number of other things. And since China itself has got a lot of stakes in South China Sea, East China Sea, and in Northeastern states, Northeast Asian states, and other places. So it is as good as a stake which even North Korea has to be part of that. So we are very fortunate today that Arijita, one of our team members, is going to take us through this analysis and its impact. I'm also grateful to her, especially that after 8 days or so she will be leaving us, but she has continued to undertake this assignment, which was decided long time back. So before taking much of your time, I would request Priyanka to introduce the speaker, and then it will be all Arijita's.
Thank you, sir. Ms Arijita Sinha Roy is a research assistant cum publication manager at the Center for Joint Warfare Studies, New Delhi. She holds a master's degree in East Asian Studies from the University of Delhi. Ms. Roy was also part of the 11th cohort for the USO Academy Law of the Sea, where she was awarded a diploma on the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. This program is convened by the Korea Maritime Institute and the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries by the Government of Republic of Korea. Over to you, Harjit. So with the permission, may I start? Good morning to all. It is indeed a great opportunity for me to be able to deliver this lecture
on a topic that is not only relevant, but also shifting the dynamics in the Northeast Asian architecture or the geopolitics, to say at the least. However, at the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Major General Dr. Ashok Kumar, Vishesh Seva Medal retired Director General CENJOWS, for giving me this opportunity, and also to those who are here to attend the talk. Through this presentation titled as North Korea's Nuclear Dilemma, a threat for Northeast Asian security, I plan to walk you all through North Korea's nuclear program, its history, why nuclear matters to them, and also the quagmire that has emerged due to the active nuclear proliferation by the country. Here, I would also like to mention that the views expressed do not represent any organization and have been solely deduced through my own research. Presentation, please. So before I begin the presentation formally, I'll just read out a few news headlines that are very often we come across almost on an everyday basis. So the first one is reading as North Korea's Kim again threatens to use nuclear weapons against South Korea, US. North Korea unveils its uranium enrichment facility for the first time, its scales and aims. North Korea confirms launch of ICBM in longest ever ballistic missile test. North Korea tells the United Nations it is speeding up nuclear weapons program. And the latest one, dated 7 January 2025, says that North Korea says new hypersonic missile will contain rivals. The reason why I wanted to draw all your attention to this slide was because almost all of us here have read these news headlines at least one or the other time, almost on a daily basis. And yet, knowing that a problem like this exists, we've not been able to understand or let alone decode the problem and find the solution as to how we can sort of deal with this dilemma. The scope of this presentation has been defined as displayed on the screen and shall remain limited to the points which are flashed. I will be covering a brief introduction followed by an understanding of the major developments in North Korea's nuclear journey. Here, I shall look into the history of North Korea's nuclear program and also how it has evolved over the time. Further, it is crucial to understand the major developments as it links us to the present narrative and further enhances one's understanding on the topic. The third point that I'll be covering is understanding North Korea's behavior, which I'll try to bring out North Korea's nuclear doctrine and how ideology plays a big role in its formulation of the nuclear doctrine. Countering North Korea's nuclear threat will look into the measures which have been taken so far as against the problem. Perspectives and policies will bring together the regional narrative which has been displayed by the US, South Korea, China, and of course Russia. Present developments will highlight the shifting dynamics. Future of Northeast Asia quagmire will highlight what could be done in the future and what is at hand. Finally, with conclusion and references of future readings for us to pursue. Okay, so North Korea has challenged traditional security threats by emerging as a rogue state which is capable of testing and also launching nuclear missiles, posing a geopolitical dilemma for policy makers. And today, North Korea's nuclear program has plagued and it threatens the security and the landscape of Northeast Asia. As Sir had correctly pointed out, the World War II, after it had ended, the nuclear problem was always existing. But what caught North Korea was that the colonization of Japan, the colonization by Japan of the Korean Peninsula. You see, North Korea's awareness of nuclear technology and its interest in science, nuclear science and technology, even antedates before it was established formally as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which dates back to 1948. The first leader, as stated in the slide, Kim Il-sung, kind of understood that the destruction that a nuclear bomb could do to the two cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the that forced an entire Japanese empire, which was once considered indispensable, to finally capitulate. The North agreed to peaceful development programs with the Soviet Union back then. The reason why, of course, is the Cold War. And it decided to establish nuclear infrastructure the Soviets helped to build and establish, which is at the reactor at the Yongbyon, which would later be central to American concerns about nuclear development on the peninsula. However, concurrently, because the Cold War was also peaking and there were multiple crises, especially the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, the North and how deterrence actually played in terms of the Cuban Missile Crisis, North Korea started to wonder whether it could actually rely much on the Soviet Union, and that is when it started developing its own nuclear missiles as a way of guaranteeing the North Korean security. So this is a timeline that I have mapped out. And it's not only that from the 2011 onwards, when Kim Jong-un actually took his power, that North Korea started becoming nuclear. We can actually trace its development back to the 1960s. So what we have here on the screen is that in the 1960s, the Soviet Union provided assistance to North Korea in building the Yongbyon nuclear reactor. China here declined to share the nuclear technology post 1964 owing to its own internal disturbances, and also to what analysts have claimed is because it never wanted another nuclear state, nuclear neighboring state. And then we have North Korea doing the fission experiments beginning in the late 1960s. Then the 1970s and the 80s actually marked the paradigm shift when we see much of activity happening. It was the 1970s that marked the regime start of pursuing its nuclear program in earnest. We have North Korea joining the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1974. In July 1985, we have the North Korea join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as Sir has correctly mentioned. And then this period is marked further by expansion and nuclear construction. What happened in the 1990s is that we know that the Cold War ended, the Soviet disintegrated, and the polarization, which was a key characteristic of the Cold War, ultimately led to the US hegemony emerging as victorious. So we have the START Treaty, which stands for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. So this treaty, first, when signed in 1991, was followed by the nuclear nukes, which were removed from South Korea. There was a declaration on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but surprisingly enough, this declaration, although have been said, has still till today not been followed up. And then there was, of course, continued nuclear missile tests and negotiations, which the US tried to contain, but it never actualized. So in the 2000s is when we see a lot of activity being pursued by North Korea. It did admit to having secret nuclear weapons. And then in January 2003, it withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, having acknowledged that it does have uranium-based reactors. And this is also in 2003, the six-party talks were organized by the United States, China, Korea, Japan, and Russia, went to negotiations if it could stop the nuclear problem of North Korea. But then again, it failed because the North Korean side was not simply agreeing to it. And then we have North Korea test its first nuclear missile in 2006, followed by the second one in 2009. The 2010 to present timeline again is just a it's just an amalgamation of the efforts which have been done so far by the US. So we do see that under the Bush administration there was a resumption of the six-party talk, but it again did not materialize. In 2011, we see Kim Jong-un take the leadership, and he finally declares North Korea as a nuclear state. We have long-range nuclear missiles added in weapons development. The UN imposes extreme sanctions on North Korea, freezing its economy, which is why till today we see that North Korea remains a closed country. The first intercontinental ballistic missile began to be tested in 2017. Moon Jae-in, who is the former president of South Korea, they met, and the Panmunjom Declaration followed by the Trump and Singapore Summit in 2018 and the Hanoi Summit in 2019. All of this will be covered in detail subsequently in the presentation. ICBMs and hypersonics continually tested by North Korea. Here, I would just like to mention how, like one point that even this is just a timeline. It's of course expanding, But one thing has to be kept in mind that even the Russia-Ukraine war is a major development that needs to be considered when we are talking about North Korea's journey as a timeline. Here, I would like to say that being nuclear is not a problem, but the problem with North Korea is that it's not a responsible nuclear state. So this is where the dilemma starts. So this is the major weapon development which has been done by North Korea. First, the table that I'll cover. We see that in 1998, it test fires the Taepodong-1 rocket over Japan, which it calls a satellite launch, but certainly it was not. In 2006, it conducted its first underground nuclear test. In 2009, again, it has a long-range rocket which flies over Japan and lands in the Pacific, later found out to be Taepodong-2, another variant of the first series. In 2012, it launches a multi-stage rocket and successfully places an Earth orbital satellite into the orbit. From 2016 onwards, we see that there is an escalation in the kind of development it has done in terms of its nuclear capabilities. So we see that it has first launched a submarine ballistic missile. In 2017, we have the ICBM Hwasong-14 being launched. In 2023, first in March 2023, we have the ICBM Hwasong-17 being launched, and in December 2023, the Hwasong-18. Although I'm not a linguistic expert, but just a trivia fact here, that Hwasong in Korean actually means Mars. So here, probably the North Korean side is signifying that, like the Romans, having the word Hwasong in one of their missiles could actually mean that war is also going to be soon be amalgamated into its policies. And on the left-hand side, we have a map. The details of these ranges, which are shown, may not be confirmed because this is taken from the North Korean side. And again, like the verification is not quite easy. But then if the value stands to be true, we can see that the ranges can also come as close to as India, which is a concern as a country. This is an interesting study which was done by the Center for Strategic International Studies under the Missile Defense Project, published in March 2022. So here you see that every missile that North Korea poses till date or has in its it has it for itself, and the ranges that it is covering. So you can see the last one, which is Hwasong-17, it says unknown, but then it can reach as far as the US continent, which is concerning. So this is a capability by a country which has been cut off from the world. And that is where North Korea's case becomes special. How is a country like North Korea still being able to pursue its nuclear development? And what are the factors and why is it pursuing is even more important? Which brings me to the second segment of the presentation. As a student of IR, when I was always having this curiosity that why countries go nuclear. Well, the answer could be because of two reasons. Number one, I mean, history has it for itself that it serves as a deterrent. It's because of the deterrence capabilities that a country wishes to explore that we have nuclear capabilities. And the second one, from a very theoretical perspective, would be the school of realism, that it is only through the display of hard power that a country can safeguard its national interests. But is it the case for North Korea? Well, I'm not quite sure about that. And that is what I'll explore in the second part of the presentation. So now, this is basically two ideologies I'll subsequently be explaining. And why I'm explaining is because it forms the basis or the genesis of what North Korea's nuclear doctrine stands as today. A bit of Korean here again, Juche, which means an agency, and it has been the national ideology of North Korea since the state's inception in 1948. And let us be reminded now, before I come to the Juche point, that whatever North Korea has done so far, it has been successful in its bargain, because it's bargain strategy with the US, because it's not been able to denuclearize. We see the problem even existing today. We see that the US has not been able to achieve its goal in complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So one advantage of it, whatever that the North Korean country is doing, is that it has been successful. So why it has been successful, we can find the answer here in Juche. Because you see, the Juche can be understood in common parlance as self-reliance. Well, it cannot be the self-reliance that we propagate as Indians, but Juche practically means self-reliant from any foreign intervention, not being subjugated to another country's ideology. And here is where this inception, the ideology posits independence in three domains, as stated in the slide: one, politics, defense, and of course, the economy. So nuclear weapons are therefore central to the North Korean regime's identity as an independent power. Here I've quoted the work by Edward Howell, who in his book mentions the Juche age from North Korean nuclear weapon and regime state survival. And he argues that the nuclear ideology functions primarily as a tool to arouse domestic legitimacy for the North Korean regime state by targeting the elite actors within the highly stratified domestic population. Now, to simplify this, what does it mean? In simple layman terms, it only means that this is a policy or this is an ideology which is ensuring the regime's survival. As we know, that North Korea, like democratic countries, follows a complete different form of government. So how does it ensure its survival? It is through Juche. Why? Because being an autocratic country, it needs certain oppressive measures. And how does it blind the people? Again, by saying that we need to be self-reliant. So Juche serves four purposes as listed. Number one, it puts the nuclear program in tandem with the national ideology. It's a rhetoric-based state ideology to promote its nuclear development. Number three, diffusion of Juche ideology translates into the nuclear doctrine as a core component. National ideology achieves domestic legitimacy, granting popular acquiescence to the regime in the process and aiding its continued survival. Juche's imprints on the North Korean nuclear policy and proliferation can be understood as to how there's a diffusion of this ideology with its nuclear doctrines. And in totality, it serves as a distinct purpose for the regime's legitimacy, any act that undertaken by the country's supreme leader. Just to summarize, it means that if the regime is surviving, it can do whatever it wants in the face of defending the country, be it nuclear development or anything else for that. On the left-hand side is the actual book, which was written by the second-in-line leader, Kim Jong-il, on the Juche idea, which was published in 1982. But North Korea does not stop only at Juche. It comes out with its second. It comes out with a second ideology, which is called as Songun. So Songun can be interesting. Rather, I would have to. I would like to draw your attention to this. After Juche, is a military firstism, and it's the second deeply embedded ideology that also advocates for North Korea's national independence, self-reliance, and underscores this need for North Korea to have a military government which is capable of again ensuring the survival of the North Korean political class. By saying this, what I mean is that both of these ideologies are complementing each other. First, the Juche is stating that we need to have regime survival. So how do we ensure that regime survival is happening? Is through this military firstism document, which is Songun. So Songun has brought militarism to permeate all aspects of North Korean life and has extended the military's influence to sectors far beyond national security. The logic of Songun is simple enough. North Korea needs a military government capable of ensuring the survival of a functional political class. Further, this system has also come to define the civil-military relations as being highlighted by Patrick de Roshi in the deriving factor, Songun's impact on North Korea's foreign policy. The external and the internal security environment of the country has not much changed for the ruling elites. The economically unsustainable Songun system, which gives the military an excessive number of natural resources, impedes economic growth. And domestically, nuclear establishment paired with military bureaucracy are both essential for the survival of the state and is seen as a symbol of pride in the country. Further, this doctrine makes it plain that North Korea may not easily surrender its nuclear program and weapons over any negotiation with the US or its allies. And therefore, it views the foreign policy insistence to the denuclearization as a danger for its national security. So therefore, Songun provides the regime with a self-sustaining ideological and organizational structure that legitimizes the allocation of vastly disproportionate national resources to the military. Domestically, the nuclear program served as a symbol of national pride and military strength, thereby legitimizing again the military's position of privilege in the regime while maintaining the continued support of the nation's nuclear establishment, military bureaucracy, both of which are fundamental to regime survival. So in simple words, these two ideologies are complementing each other, which is embedded in North Korea's pursuance of nuclear development. And because one might wonder that a country which is cut off, it's failing it's failing its economy, it's failing its people, still continues to pursue nuclear development. Why? We have the answer. Because one is self-reliance from any foreign intervention, and the second is, of course, military firstism. So on the right-hand side, we have this poster, which is very popular again in North Korea. We see that youth of the country is holding hands, which is symbolical in nature in terms that it is going to defend the country in times that may come. So the text, which is written in Korean, reads out as Songun 정치 왜 위대한 성리 만세, which means that may the victory of the military firstism be always prevailing. So now when I've spoken about the ideology, how nuclear has actually shaped the North Korean discourse, let me come to what are the countermeasures which have been actually adopted in countering this sort of threat. So in 1994, we first start off with the US and North Korea signing the agreed framework in Geneva, relaxing the sanctions. In 1995, we have South Korea establishing a Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization, which is KEDO. So here I would like to say that KEDO was basically planned with an aim to replace North Korea's nuclear reactors, but then it never actually materialized again. These are all agreements which have been there in action, but which have been there in policy, but not in action. In 1999, there was a missile moratorium, but North Korea agrees to suspend its long-range missile testing, only for it to again resume testing in in the early 2000s. We have the first inter-Korean summit, which took place between the North Korean leader Kim Jong-il and the South Korean President Kim Dae-jung as part of the Sunshine Policy. We have the launch of six-party talks in 2003. Then we fast forward to 2018, we have the Singapore summit between North Korea and US. Panmunjom Declaration between the two Koreas was announced. Hanoi summit between North Korea and US in 2019, and then 2021 we have the Biden policy review, which I will be subsequently covering. And again, to your attention, on the left, we have Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in from South Korea shaking hands. This was the first time that a South Korean president had actually crossed the demilitarized zone as again, a symbol to ensure that inter-Korean relations are intact, but then it only got deteriorated in the subsequent South Korean government's administration. So now I'll be covering the perspectives and policies, which is basically to bring out what regional partners like South Korea, the US, China, Russia think of the problem and how do they deal with it. So South Korea again has typically maintained the same stature when it as compared to the US vis-a-vis the North Korean problem. Reason being, of course, that it's a close ally of the US, and most of its ideological underpinnings have been shaped by how the US has treated the North Korean counterpart. South Korea has pursued for long a peaceful reunification, as seen in the Sunshine Policy by Kim Dae-jung, and then of course Moon Jae-in's visit to North Korea, which was shown in the previous slide. The THAAD development remains a major cornerstone in staunch support against North Korea's nuclear proliferation. The present, the Yoon Suk-yeol government, which is of course under pressure now because of the impeachment and all of that, but irrespective of that, has taken a very realist posture towards North Korea by redoing most of the policies of the previous government. How it has done that is that it is trying to accumulate a political clout in the international community against North Korea. It released its own national security strategy and the Indo-Pacific strategy, positioning itself as a global pivotal state in 2022. The reason why the word global pivotal state has been used for the first time by South Korea was also because not only it wanted to align itself more with like-minded nations in the Indo-Pacific, but also in disguise garnered that sort of political clout which it could use against North Korea. The new South Korean administration under President Yoon Suk Yeol has also reinvigorated military planning for preemptive and retaliatory strikes against the North Korean leadership under the so-called kill chain and the Korean massive punishment and retaliation strategies. The policies pursued by South Korea under the present dispensation has been provocative and adopted a hardline approach. When I say this, what I mean is that this is for the first time that any South Korean government has gone to an extent which has been so realist in nature that even his counterpart has agreed to say that there is no unification. I would also like to add here that South Korea does not recognize North Korea as a sovereign state. The constitution of South Korea does not recognize North Korea as a sovereign state. But despite that, there were talks of reunification, which are completely halted under the present dispensation. The US. So since the time of North Korea was created, the US has always been there, although being geographically distant from the region. So what the US's perspectives and policies have been vis-a-vis North Korea are that it remains steadfast in the objective of complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and pursues a combination of pressure and diplomacy to achieve this goal. It will respond to the threat with closer US-Korea-Japan bilateral and trilateral security, as was seen from 2022 under the Biden administration when the Camp David summit took place, that Korea and Japan were finally able to move beyond their colonial antagonism and came together to join hands in not only tackling the issue of China, but also other regional problems, including the one for North Korea. And then this trilateral security cooperation was also extended in terms of intelligence cooperation as well as cooperation on sanctions. It maintains that the US bears no hostile intent to North Korea. The US remains open to serious and sustained dialogue with DPRK and is prepared to meet without any preconditions, which is the biggest problem in how the US is seeing the North Korean problem. The terms of denuclearization when it comes to the US has always been about how it sees the Korean Peninsula in terms of denuclearization without actually taking into cognizance the wishes and the conditions of the North Korean state. The US is also prepared to take practical steps to address regional security and concerns of both sides. Due to paucity of time, I may not cover all the policies which were taken by each of the US president, but I would like to bring the attention to the recent two, which is the Biden administration, Trump administration in the first, and the what can be expected from Trump 2.0. So the Biden administration had strong relations, tried at least provocating or advocating strong relations with both Japan and South Korea. It had completely vouched for denuclearization, and also the approach to the Korean Peninsula. The Korean Peninsula was much of that. It clubbed four countries into the same ideological bloc, which could be seen as a problem. That it lumped China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran into one ideological category and ignored the differences in how each of these countries treats their nuclear ambitions is where the Biden administration is said to have gone wrong. The Trump administration, much likely, can be understood that in its first administration, at least tried in engaging some sort of diplomatically with the North Korean counterpart. We did see that there were movement in terms of the Hanoi summit, the Singapore summit. But what went wrong was that although it had dealt with, what went wrong was that it could not understand the North Korean side. Trump's wishes of denuclearization was only based on the US's interest in the region, disregarding completely the wishes of South Korea as well as North Korea. So, however, in Trump 2.0, what can be expected is that Trump himself realizes that there is zero possibility of North Korea giving up its own nuclear. Any country would not. Which country in today's world would give up its capabilities as crucial as nuclear just for the US to fulfill its interests? No country would do that. So the movement, so what we can expect is that we can expect another set of maybe dialogue under Trump 2.0, perhaps Russia in the picture as well. But that is again all speculation, and we have to wait till the actual meetings take place between the US and North Korea. Russia, interestingly, has emerged as a very close partner of the North Korea. In December, I'll just run quickly through the trajectory that it has followed. In December 2013, Russia actually joined the sanctions against North Korea. The resolution number has also been cited. because it is surprising of how it went back on his words and now is again associated with North Korea. The corresponding degree signed between President Putin specified that Russian companies were prohibited to even provide North Korea with any technical assistance and advised in the development and production of ballistic missiles. Fast forward to 2024, we have Russia and North Korea signing the Treaty of Comprehensive Partnership, revisiting or nullifying all of it that was mentioned, and then promising it to even extend space technologies amidst the ongoing Ukraine war, where he met his counterpart. And this is very interesting because because what will happen if the war ends? Will Russia continue to provide North Korea with the same sort of assistance like it is doing now? That is a question that needs to be understood. So is this closeness which has emerged between the North Korea and Russia, will it sustain the time now that Trump is also in power? Because if the war ends tomorrow, will this sort of bonhomie between Russia and North Korea continue? So that is an answer. That is a question that North Korea must consider in when it is deciding its relations with Russia. Okay, so now with China, the interesting thing is that China views North Korea as a buffer against the US. And as Sir had correctly pointed out at the introduction, that it has often used even North Korea as a launch pad or as a test field where it could test its own missiles. But now that Russia and North Korea are having a sort of bonhomie, there is a change in narrative. Change in narrative again stems from the reason that China has never been secured about its own borders. We've seen during the Cold War that there was a momentary Sino-Soviet split. We see how China deals with its border issues. We've seen that it's very insecure with any country with whom it shares its border, and it's the same problem is there even with North Korea. So Beijing supports North Korea's nuclear weapon, but at the same time, it also is supporting the sanctions against North Korea, which is very diabolical. And it cannot be said that it's taking sides. If one does a close study to it, it finds that China has interest in the Korean Peninsula for 3 reasons. Number one is that prevent any resumption of armed conflict in the peninsula, because any armed conflict in the peninsula would mean that China is by default being dragged into it. The second point is that it wants to prevent any messy collapse of the DPRK regime. Why it want to prevent that is simply because that it sees North Korea as a buffer against the US. It does not want the present dispensation to collapse at any cost. And the third reason is that it discourages any unification which are under the terms and guidelines of the US. So it encourages North Korea to follow its own reform path and also has given enough economic assistance to the North Korean regime. It has encouraged North Korean regime to uphold international agreements with the US to end its nuclear weapons. The China sees the issue of the Korean Peninsula will eventually be unified, but then largely under the aegis of the South Korean government, which remains a problem for it. As for the crisis of the nuclear front deepens with North Korea, it is driven with a dilemma due to 3 reasons. Number one, North Korea's behavior and continued provocation presses China to agree to sanctions, but it does not want the regime to collapse. Number two, North Korea's behavior is pushing South Korea close to the US, and this is making South Korea more receptive to ballistic missiles defense systems, which is again triggering China. And North Korea's behavior raises the importance of China to talk with the US, which under these circumstances is something we cannot expect, given the fact that both US and China are undergoing a dynamic shift in their relations. So what are the shifting dynamics? What can we differ from all of it that has been stated so far? Number one is that North Korea has been unprecedentedly testing and proliferating nuclear missiles. It has raised concerns to both to South Korea, Japan, and the US, and it will continue to proliferate nuclear weapons. That is a given, and it cannot just disappear. In 2022 itself, Kim Jong-un amended the North Korea's nuclear policy and said that it can launch a preemptive strike at any given point of time. And there are no intentions of reunification, especially after how the present dispensation in South Korea has unfolded. The testing landscape can be considered as an important factor behind the South Korea-Japan rapprochement. However, while this is important, there is also one point to be considered that for the past 2-3 months, we've seen that South Korea's democratic institution has basically upended. And with no movement in its foreign policy or its defense policies, this sort of rapprochement comes into a volatile condition. Given the volatile situation, the security landscape is destabilizing, and probably a bloc politics similar to Cold War is evident. North Korea and Russia are growing closer, but subject to the war. The US sanctions have not limited North Korea's right to assert itself as a nuclear state. And now, finally, all of this has accumulated into one thing, that the South Korean policymakers under the present administration is considering to go nuclear. So it is, rather than denuclearization, what the trend is happening is it is shifting towards nuclearization, more and more nuclearization. This problem is not only with South Korea, but even Japan is now considering, but it is limited by its Article 9 in the Constitution. So what happens to the future of the Northeast Asia? In January 2023, South Korean President John Suk-yeol mentioned that if the present situation gets worse, it is possible for South Korea to have its nuclear weapons. Public sentiment in South Korea is shifting, with some segments advocating for a more assertive stance, including the consideration of nuclear weapons as a security measure. The pursuit of nuclear, so if you see, all these points are linked. So if there's a pursuit of nuclear weapon by South Korea, this could trigger a further regional proliferation, impacting the delicate balance of power in Northeast Asia. Development of indigenous nuclear weapon programs could strain South Korea's alliances, particularly the US. The US, under any measure, would not prefer having South Korea or Japan go nuclear. May lead to a reassessment of security commitments and cooperation, impacting broader regional security. The US, which is known for its hub and spokes model in the Northeast Asian region, may again have to do a reassessment. Neighboring countries and the international community would likely react strongly to such developments. So how do you react? How did the world react when Russia invaded Ukraine? Or how did the world react? So similar reactions are going to follow if these of the situations or the scenarios will, if they materialize. However, we cannot disregard the fact that there could be still options or measures that can be used. So some of them are listed here. Of course, diplomatic efforts are crucial to address South Korea's security concerns. The United States and international partners should engage in open dialogue, but this dialogue should not be one-sided. It should be completely understanding. It should be comprehensive, and it should provide reassurances. Collaborative efforts in missile defense, intelligence sharing, and joint military exercises can bolster regional stability, but regional security, maybe not. Proactive steps in conflict prevention and resolution are crucial to address the root causes of security concerns, emphasizing the importance of non-proliferation commitments and reinforcing on international norms. Promoting economic and technological cooperation can provide South Korea with an alternative avenue for security enhancement, reducing the reliance on nuclear weapon as a deterrent. So this brings me to the conclusion of my talk. I'll just summarize quickly the points. That is, East Asian security is plagued by the continuous nuclear proliferation by North Korea. North Korea's behavior is undertaking nuclear development and can be understood from the deeply embedded Juche ideology in the Songun document. Major countries like the US, Japan, China, and Russia have individual policy towards containing the threat. The security landscape is in Northeast Asia and Korean Peninsula is transitioning. Destabilization, followed by destabilization and bloc politics. South Korea is considering to develop its nuclear capabilities. If it does, it's going to shatter the hub and spokes model. The US and its allies must consider to post clarity when it comes to strategizing the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Here are certain readings that can be that I would be more than happy to share if anybody is interested in taking up an analysis on North Korea's nuclear program. And with that, I thank all of you for being so patient and hearing my thoughts on the same. Thank you, sir.